The private jet was gone. Rico Santoro stood motionless at gate C12, his black suit cutting through the terminal chaos like a knife through water. Rain hammered the floor-to-ceiling windows behind him, each drop racing the others downward. The brown leather briefcase hung from his grip, the same briefcase that held documents capable of toppling senators, destroying families, reshaping the entire East Coast power structure. It was supposed to be somewhere over the Atlantic by now. Travelers rushed past him in organized chaos. Roller luggage clicked against polished floors. Announcements echoed through speakers. Destinations, delays, boarding calls. Nobody made eye contact. Nobody dared. His tattoos crawled up his neck, visible against the crisp white collar of his shirt. His beard was dark, precisely maintained. His jaw moved once, clicking into place, a sound only he could hear. He'd never missed a flight. Not once in 15 years. Not during the war with the Castellano family. Not when federal agents had him under surveillance. Not when his own lieutenant had threatened to flip. Missing a flight meant losing advantage. Losing advantage meant becoming prey. And Rico Santoro was nobody's prey. Hi viewers, kindly tell us where you're watching from and what time it is. The betrayal this morning had forced his hand. His most trusted lieutenant, Marcus, the man he'd elevated from street corners, had moved product without authorization. $500,000 in pharmaceuticals rerouted to a rival operation. The interrogation had consumed 6 hours. Lawyers, phone calls to family members, veiled threats about what happened to people who stole from him. By the time Rico reached the airport, his carefully orchestrated meeting with Senator Morrison was slipping away like sand through his fingers. The senator had the documents Rico needed. Or rather, Rico had the documents the senator desperately wanted hidden. That was the actual transaction happening here. Rico was bringing leverage. The senator was supposed to understand that leverage meant compliance. Now the senator would be celebrating, believing Rico had backed down, believing the missed flight meant weakness. Wrong. Rico knelt to adjust the combination lock on his briefcase. The action was deliberate, controlled. Everything about him was controlled. That was the source of his power. Not rage, not volume. Control. A man who could stand still while others spiraled had already won. He lowered himself onto one knee, fingers working the lock. That's when the sound changed. Not the sound of luggage or announcements or travelers. A different frequency entirely. Desperate, frantic, high-pitched. His head tilted upward. A child was running across the terminal floor. A girl, maybe 5 or 6 years old. Blonde hair tied in a high ponytail, flying behind her like a flag being pulled through the air. She wore a navy school pinafore over a white long-sleeve shirt, a red necktie swinging wildly. White tights, black shoes hitting the ground in rapid-fire taps. She was crying, not whimpering, not pouting. The sound was primal, the kind of sound a child makes when their entire world has collapsed. Her arms stretched outward, reaching for something, someone, safety, anything that could stop the catastrophe happening inside her small body. She was running straight toward him. Rico remained on one knee, motionless, watching her close the distance between them. 30 feet, 20 feet, 10. Her face was blotchy, red, wet with tears that streamed from her eyes like she'd been crying for an hour. Her mouth opened wide. "Please help me," she screamed. "My mama, She's not walking. She's not breathing right." Her voice cut through the terminal like a siren. People turned their heads. Business travelers in tailored suits paused mid-conversation. A mother with 2 toddlers stared. Baggage handlers near the carousel exchanged glances. Security guards looked up from their posts, assessing the situation, calculating whether they needed to move. Nobody moved. The girl's eyes locked onto Rico's face, desperation meeting darkness, and she ran faster, her small legs pumping beneath the pinafore, her arms reaching towards him like he was the only solid thing in a world that had turned to water. She grabbed his hand with both of hers. Her fingers were cold, small, trembling. She gripped him with the kind of strength that comes from pure survival instinct, the same instinct that makes drowning people drag down those trying to save them. "Please, please, please," she gasped between sobs. "Mama fell down. Nobody helps us. Nobody sees us. Please, you have to help me." Rico rose slowly to his full height. 6'2", 220 pounds of controlled muscle and calculated power. Tattoos on his hands, his neck, his back, each one marking a chapter in his rise through the underworld. He towered over her, and yet her grip on his hand didn't loosen. "What is your name?" His voice came out lower than usual, a frequency reserved for moments before violence. "Noelia," she whispered. "I'm Noelia. My mama is Isla. She's at the hotel, the big hotel. She's a cleaner, and she fell and she won't get up, and nobody helps." Her accent was Spanish tinged, soft, threaded through with American English. Her words came out fractured, priority shifting second by second, her mother's danger the only thing that mattered anymore. Rico's eyes remained locked on hers while his brain processed the variables. A child, alone, crying, running, seeking him specifically out of thousands of people in this terminal. That was the question worth asking. Why him? Why this man? Why had she chosen to run toward him when other adults surrounded them? Then he understood. She hadn't chosen him because he looked kind. She'd chosen him because he looked powerful. Because she'd learned, in whatever short life she'd lived, that kindness wouldn't save her mother. Only power could. Only someone who could command the world's attention without raising their voice. "Where exactly is your mama?" Rico asked. "Room 4812, Noelia said, her words tumbling out in a rush. "The service hallway, the big hotel near the airport. Mama said if anything happens to run to the airport because police are there, because police help. But you're here. You're here and you can help." Rico picked up his briefcase. He extended his other hand toward her. "Let's find your mother." The moment those words left his mouth, a woman 3 gates over gasped. A man in a grey business suit actually stepped backward, as if proximity to Rico Santoro had suddenly become dangerous. Because it had. Rico Santoro made a choice that would cascade through the lives of everyone it touched, everyone he would touch, everyone who would touch him, everyone standing in that terminal who would eventually understand that one missed flight, one crying child, one moment of deviation had rewritten the entire architecture of his future. What he didn't know was that Isla Cruz, the woman lying unconscious on a hotel hallway floor, was connected to the senator he was supposed to meet. That the documents in his briefcase meant something completely different now. That fate wasn't just making him miss a flight. Fate was handing him the key to everything. As Rico walked toward the exit, Noelia's small hand clenched in his. Something vibrated in his pocket. His phone. A message from his lieutenant. "Boss, the senator knows you missed the flight. He's not waiting anymore. He's making moves, dangerous ones." The SUV cut through the rain-slicked streets like a blade through silk. Rico drove with both hands on the wheel, his focus absolute. The windshield wipers beat a rhythm against the downpour. Noelia sat in the passenger seat, small enough that her feet barely reached the floor, her head just visible above the window line. She'd stopped crying 5 minutes ago, but her body still trembled with the aftershock of panic. Her hands were folded in her lap. Her eyes were fixed forward, toward the hotel that grew larger with each passing block. In the second vehicle behind them, Rico's men followed in silence. 3 of them, trained operatives who understood that their boss's mood had shifted into something none of them had witnessed before now. Rico Santoro was taking a child to find her mother. The equation didn't balance. The variables didn't compute, but they followed because that's what you did when Rico Santoro decided something. "Is your mama always working?" Rico asked, his eyes never leaving the road. Noelia's voice came out small, reduced. "Since Papa left, Mama says we need money for the apartment, for food, for school." She paused. "She says Mama's got to work." "Who says that? Your mother?" "My teacher. She says that when other kids have new backpacks, Mama says we have what we need." Noelia's eyes blinked slowly. "But sometimes Mama gets really tired. Sometimes she falls asleep at dinner." Rico's jaw tightened. He said nothing. The rain continued. "She's not a bad mama," Noelia continued, sensing she needed to defend the woman lying unconscious in a hallway somewhere. "She's the best mama. She just works too much." "How many hours a day?" "I don't know. Before I wake up, after I sleep, Mama's always working." The monarch grand appeared through the rain like a monument to excess. Glass and steel and polished surfaces. A 5-star hotel where presidents stayed, where senators held meetings, where the elite convinced themselves they existed separate from the rest of the world. Rico pulled into the service entrance, the back way, the way staff used, the way people like Isla Cruz entered and exited the building. He killed the engine. "You stay here," Rico said to Noelia. "Don't move. Don't open the door. I'll find your mama." "No," Noelia said immediately. "No, I come with you." Rico turned to look at her. A 6-year-old child, telling him no. The absurdity of it struck him. "You wait here." "She's my mama," Noelia said, and her voice had shifted. The desperation was gone, replaced by something that sounded like certainty. "I find my mama. I come." Rico could have commanded her compliance. He'd commanded larger armies. Instead, he opened the passenger door and let her climb down, her small shoes meeting the wet pavement. Inside the hotel's service corridor, the smell hit first. Bleach, industrial cleaner. The scent of labor made chemical and anonymous. Fluorescent lights hummed overhead, casting everything in a sterile white that erased shadows and hid nothing. Staff members passed in the hallway, housekeeping carts, maintenance workers, and every single one froze when they saw Rico Santoro walking through their space. People knew who he was. Rico's reputation traveled in the underworld like electricity through wire, reaching everyone, touching everything. The concierge on the main floor had gone pale when he'd passed. The bellhop had suddenly found urgent business elsewhere. Even now, maintenance workers were stepping into doorways, making themselves small, making themselves disappear from his trajectory. "Which hallway?" Rico asked Noelia. "That way," she said, pointing. "4th floor. The senator's hallway. They climbed the service stairs, 4 flights. The stairwell was narrow, concrete and metal, designed for people who didn't matter, the workers who existed to serve the hotel's guests, but weren't supposed to be seen while doing it. Noelia climbed without complaining, her small legs working against the height of each step. At the 4th floor, she led him down a hallway that looked identical to every other hallway in the hotel. Doors marked with room numbers, quiet, isolated, perfect for the kind of people who valued privacy over rules. "There," Noelia whispered. Isla Cruz lay on the floor where she'd collapsed. Her uniform was wrinkled. Her brown skin had faded to a grayish tone. Her body curved against the wall like she'd slumped down in slow motion. Her chest rose and fell, shallow, labored breathing that made every breath seem like an argument with her own body. Rico knelt beside her, one hand on her wrist. Her pulse was there, but it was weak, unreliable, like a clock running down. "Mama!" Noelia dropped beside him. "Mama, wake up! Please wake up!" A woman appeared from inside one of the rooms, mid-50s, severe expression. Name tag reading Margaret Hastings, supervisor. "She's not cleared to be back here," Margaret said, her eyes on Noelia. "Children aren't allowed in staff areas." "Is that right?" Rico's voice was quiet, dangerous, the kind of quiet that made Margaret's face drain of color as she recognized the man kneeling on her floor. "I was about to call someone," Margaret said quickly. "I just found her like this when I was doing room checks." Rico stood to his full height. Margaret stepped backward. "Tell me what happened," Rico said. She was cleaning. The senator's suite. It was a rush job. I told her to prioritize it and... You sent a woman who was already exhausted to work without breaks?" Margaret's mouth opened, closed. The silence confirmed what didn't need to be said. "Did you check on her? At any point?" "There wasn't time." The VIP guest was... "Get ambulance here," Rico interrupted. His voice stayed level, conversational. "Right now, or I start with you and work my way through every executive in this hotel." Margaret pulled out her phone with shaking hands. Noelia held her mother's limp hand. "Mama's gonna be okay. Mama's gonna wake up. The man helped us. Everything's okay now." But it wasn't okay. And both Rico and Noelia understood that with a clarity that children sometimes possess, the ability to recognize when the world had shifted, when normal had become something else entirely, when safety was still a stranger wearing a familiar face. The ambulance was arriving in 90 seconds. Rico would ride with them to the hospital. He would stay with Isla while doctors worked on her failing body. He would sit across from Noelia in a waiting room and watch her understand that mothers weren't invincible after all. And he would begin to understand something about himself that he thought had died years ago. That his power, carefully cultivated and ruthlessly maintained, could be used for something other than dominance. What neither of them knew yet was that this hotel, this job, this collapse, it was all part of something much larger. Something that involved senators and families and the documents in Rico's briefcase. Something that would make Noelia's mother's emergency into a weapon and Rico himself into something between savior and predator. But that revelation was still minutes away. For now, Rico knelt beside a sick woman and made a silent decision. Then he looked up toward the sound of sirens approaching. The hospital hallway smelled like antibiotics and hope dying quietly in corners. Rico sat in a plastic chair that wasn't designed for someone his size, his massive frame folded into something resembling normal human proportions. Noelia was asleep in the chair beside him, her head tilted at an angle that would make her neck hurt when she woke up. Her small hand was wrapped around his pinky finger, the kind of grip only children could maintain. Unconscious, absolute, unbreakable. Inside the room beyond the glass window, Isla Cruz was being stabilized. IV tubes ran into her arms. A monitor displayed her heartbeat in a steady rhythm that had been chaotic when the ambulance arrived. A doctor, female, Jamaican accent, name tag reading Dr. Keisha Williams, had been checking on her every 20 minutes. Her expression gradually shifting from concern to cautious optimism. Rico's phone had been buzzing for the last hour. His lieutenant, his accountant, other men in his organization wondering where their boss had gone, why his location had stopped moving, why he wasn't responding to messages about a shipment that needed rerouting. He'd silenced the phone. Whatever was happening in his world, the business, the politics, the careful balance of power he'd constructed, could wait. A nurse approached, mid-60s, grey locks tied back, an exhaustion that came from caring for people who couldn't pay her enough. She carried a cup of coffee. "For you," she said, extending it. "You've been here 3 hours without moving." Rico took it. "Thank you. You family?" the nurse asked, settling into the chair across from him. "No. That child, though," the nurse nodded toward Noelia. "She won't let go of your hand. She woke up twice looking for you. I told her you were right there. She went back to sleep." Rico looked at Noelia's small fingers, still gripping his pinky. He'd never had this. A connection without agenda. Someone holding on to him because they needed safety, not because they wanted something from him. "Her mother?" Rico asked. "Isla's going to recover." Blood pressure dropped from exhaustion and dehydration. Her blood sugar bottomed out. She collapsed, but her body didn't fail completely. She was lucky. The nurse paused. Or someone made her lucky by getting her here fast. Rico said nothing. "I've been working here 7 years," the nurse continued. "I see Isla come through this hospital maybe twice a year, always on her days off. Always with Noelia. That woman works herself into the ground." She set a second coffee on the side table. "That supervisor who called the ambulance? Margaret Hastings. She came by an hour ago looking nervous. Said she wanted to make sure Isla was okay. I told her to come back during visiting hours." Rico's jaw tightened. "She did what?" "Came by," the nurse repeated, looking concerned. "Professional worry." The nurse leaned forward, lowering her voice. "But I've been working here long enough to know when concern is real and when it's cover." That woman was terrified. She wasn't worried about Isla. She was worried about something else. Rico understood that distinction immediately. Fear that you caused someone. Fear that your actions had consequences. Fear that someone would hold you accountable. "Did she say anything?" Rico asked. "She asked what happened. I told her Isla had collapsed from exhaustion, that she needed rest, that overwork had almost killed her." The nurse smiled. I made sure she understood that correlation very clearly. Rico almost smiled. "The child's name is Noelia?" the nurse asked. "Yes. She told me her mama works too much, that her mama gets tired but keeps working because they need the money." The nurse shook her head. 6 years old, and she already understands economics. That's what this system does to people. Rico heard her meaning underneath the words. This wasn't just negligence. This was structure, the way hotels operated, the way workers were treated, the way women like Isla became invisible until they collapsed and then became liability instead of human. Noelia stirred in her sleep. "Your coffee's getting cold," the nurse said, standing. "I'm Tasha, by the way. I'll be back around to check on Isla in an hour." She walked away, her shoes making quiet sounds against the linoleum. Rico remained in the plastic chair, coffee growing cold in his hands. A child's fingers wrapped around his pinky, and the first real question forming in his mind. What was Isla's connection to anything that mattered? She was nobody. A hotel maid, invisible to people like senators and corporate executives. Why would the universe arrange for him to miss his flight, for her daughter to find him, for him to be sitting in a hospital room when that same hotel, the Monarch Grand, was somehow connected to everything he'd been working toward? The senator wasn't random. The briefcase wasn't random. The missed flight wasn't random. Rico didn't believe in fate. But he was beginning to wonder if the universe had its own algorithms, its own logic, its own way of connecting seemingly unrelated events into patterns that suddenly made perfect sense. Inside the hospital room, Isla's eyes moved beneath her eyelids. She was dreaming something, processing what had happened. Her body was beginning to remember the world beyond collapse. Rico made a decision. When he stood up, when he made his next move, everything would change. The senator would understand that Rico hadn't backed down from the missed flight. The Castellano family would understand that Rico had found something they didn't know existed. And Rico himself would understand that his power, which he'd always used to destroy things, could also be used to protect them. But first, he needed to know everything about Isla Cruz. He needed to understand why she mattered, and he needed to understand exactly what, or who, he was walking into when he decided to protect her. His phone buzzed again. He looked at the screen. A message from an unknown number. "We know you missed the flight. We know where you are. We know about the girl. Be smart about what comes next." Rico read it twice. Then he deleted it and blocked the number, and held Noelia's sleeping hand tighter. Isla's eyes opened at 3:47 in the morning. Rico wasn't asleep. He'd been sitting in the darkness, watching her breathing, watching the monitors track her recovery. Noelia was curled up in his lap now, finally exhausted enough to stop fighting rest. The child had refused every offer to move to a proper bed, refused to let go of the connection she'd formed with the man who'd stopped everything to find her mother. Isla's gaze moved slowly around the room. Confusion, then recognition, then fear. "Where?" Her voice came out cracked, destroyed. "Hospital," Rico said quietly. "You collapsed at work. Your daughter found me. I brought you here." Memory crashed through Isla's features. Room 4812, the senator's suite. Margaret's voice demanding speed, demanding perfection, demanding sacrifice. The spinning sensation as her vision went dark. The terrifying moment of losing control. "Noelia," Isla said, trying to sit up. "She's here. She's fine." Rico shifted slightly so Isla could see her daughter sleeping against his chest. "She's been here the whole time." Tears spilled down Isla's face without sound. The kind of tears that come from relief, so absolute it becomes its own form of pain. "Thank you," she whispered. "Thank you, thank you, thank you." "Don't thank me," Rico said. "Just rest." "I don't know your name," Isla said. "I don't know how to. I can't pay you. I have no money to pay you." Rico had encountered this before, the powerlessness of people with nothing, trying to find ways to compensate for receiving help. The dignity they fought to maintain, even while understanding they had nothing to offer. "My name is Rico," he said. "You don't owe me anything. Isla's breathing steadied. She watched her daughter sleeping against this stranger's chest, watched this man who looked like danger itself cradling her child like she mattered, like she was worth something. Like protection wasn't something you had to earn by having money or status or the right connections. "What will happen?" Isla asked. "When I go back?" Rico understood the question beneath the question. Will I still have my job? Will they fire me for collapsing? Will I be blamed for the inconvenience of my own body failing? "You're not going back," Rico said. "I have to," Isla said. "We need the money. I need." "You need rest. You need to stop working yourself until you collapse." Rico's voice wasn't unkind, but it was absolute. "You're not going back to the Monarch Grand." "You don't understand," Isla said, panic rising in her voice. "My rent is due, Noelia's school, the food. Everything depends on..." "Everything depends on you staying alive," Rico interrupted. "That's what depends on everything now." Isla understood then that this wasn't a suggestion. This was a man who decided something, and decisions made by men like him didn't get reversed by arguments or desperation. "Why are you helping us?" Isla asked, her voice barely audible. Rico didn't answer immediately. The truth was complicated. It involved memory, a version of himself at age 8, running through streets, looking for someone, anyone who would see him as something other than a problem. It involved the way Noelia had grabbed his hand like he was the only solid object in a drowning world. It involved the fact that his entire life had been built on the principle of control, and somehow, for the first time, he'd discovered that protection felt different than dominance. "Because someone should have helped me when I needed it," Rico said finally, "and nobody did." Isla's expression shifted. Recognition, maybe. The understanding that trauma creates its own vocabulary, and they were both speaking it fluently. "You're a good man," Isla said. Rico almost laughed. "I'm not a good man." "You are," Isla insisted. "Good men don't look like you, but you are." Rico turned away. Through the hospital window, the city sprawled in darkness, millions of people sleeping or working or struggling or surviving. Millions of stories happening simultaneously, most of them invisible to each other, most of them unknown. He'd spent his entire life trying to be noticed, trying to climb higher, trying to acquire power that would make him untouchable. And then a 6-year-old in a school uniform had touched him and reminded him why he'd wanted power in the first place. Not to dominate, but to protect. His phone vibrated, a message from his lieutenant. "Boss, we got the structural breakdown on the Monarch Grand. Who owns it? Who profits? You're not gonna believe this." Rico read the attachment. Castellano Holdings, the same family he was at war with, the same organization that had made him miss his flight because they'd manufactured the crisis with his lieutenant, the same constellation of power and corruption that had stolen territory, resources, lives. And they owned the hotel where Isla Cruz worked. They owned the system that had nearly killed her. Rico looked at Noelia, still sleeping against his chest. He looked at Isla, watching him with gratitude and fear and desperate hope. And he understood that missing his flight hadn't been bad luck. It had been the best thing that could have happened, because now he knew what he was actually fighting for. Now he had a reason. Now he had names and structures and a way to dismantle the Castellano Empire that went deeper than territory or profit. He could destroy them by protecting the people they'd decided were disposable. Rico opened his phone and called his number, 2. "I want every operation connected to that hotel," he said quietly. "Every executive, every manager, every decision they made that hurt people. I want evidence. I want documentation. I want everything." He paused. "And I want it kept quiet. Nobody moves against them until I say so." "What are we doing, boss?" "We're going to burn them," Rico said. "But we're going to do it slow, so they understand exactly what they lost and why they lost it." He hung up. Noelia stirred slightly in her sleep. Her fingers gripped his shirt. Rico understood then that he'd crossed a line he couldn't uncross. That somewhere between missing his flight and finding this child, he'd stopped being a man who killed for profit and started being a man who would destroy empires to keep one family safe. The question was, did the Castellano family know what was about to happen to them? And more importantly, would they do anything desperate enough to come after Noelia and Isla before Rico finished burning their world to the ground? The Monarch Grand's lobby froze when Rico Santoro walked through the doors. He wasn't carrying the briefcase this time. He was carrying something worse: information, intention, and the kind of focused rage that looked like calm to people who didn't understand the difference. Behind him came 3 of his men, their presence enough to make security personnel suddenly need to be elsewhere. The concierge actually stepped backward. A woman at the front desk found urgent business checking something on her computer. Bellhops made themselves invisible. Rico walked straight to the elevator that would take him to the executive offices. The kind of elevator designed for people who made decisions that affected thousands of lives without ever seeing their faces. Nobody stopped him. On the 15th floor, a receptionist looked up from her desk and immediately looked back down. Rico found the office he was looking for. Jerome Mitchell, executive manager. He didn't knock. Jerome Mitchell, mid-50s, tailored suit, polished shoes, the kind of man who'd learned to make cruelty sound like policy, looked up from his desk with an expression that shifted rapidly from confusion to recognition to something that resembled fear. "Mr. Santoro," Jerome said, his voice attempting steadiness and failing. "This is unexpected. I'm not sure we have an appointment." "We don't," Rico said. He pulled the chair across from Jerome's desk and sat down. His men remained standing in the doorway, silent and immense. Jerome's hands moved to his desk, then retreated. He understood that any movement toward a panic button would result in consequences he couldn't control. "I want to talk about Isla Cruz," Rico said. Jerome's face showed nothing, but his eyes betrayed him. A flicker of recognition, an understanding that this man, this criminal, this underworld figure, had come here about a maid. "I don't," Jerome began. "You sent her to clean the senator's suite," Rico interrupted. "Alone, without breaks, after she'd already worked a full rotation. You had her work while dehydrated, underfed, without proper labor breaks. And when she collapsed, when her body literally gave out from the abuse you systemically imposed, your supervisor didn't check on her, didn't call for help, just left her on the floor." Jerome swallowed. "She's a hotel employee. Her working conditions are—" "You almost killed her," Rico said quietly, in front of her daughter. "A child watched her mother collapse because of decisions you made." "There's nothing I can do about that now," Jerome said, attempting to regain some semblance of control. "She's being treated. The situation has been handled." "The situation," Rico repeated, "hasn't even started." Rico stood up. "You're going to do several things. You're going to ensure that every worker who's been exploited here receives back wages. You're going to implement mandatory break periods. You're going to hire a labor specialist who will ensure that this hotel complies with every labor law that currently exists. And you're going to do this quietly, without making noise, without drawing attention from your superiors. Jerome's face went pale. I can't make those decisions unilaterally. I'd need approval from corporate. Then you'll get approval from corporate, Rico said. You'll make them understand that compliance is cheaper than the alternative. Jerome understood that alternative without needing elaboration. If Isla Cruz has any problem at all, if she's contacted, if she experiences retaliation of any kind, if anyone connected to this hotel approaches her or her daughter, I will personally ensure that you understand the cost of that decision. Rico turned toward the door. Am I being clear? He asked, not turning back. Yes, Jerome said, his voice barely a whisper. Perfectly clear. The hallway outside Jerome's office was silent. Rico's men fell into step behind him as he walked back toward the elevators. In the lobby, he took a moment to observe the functioning of the system. Guests checking in, checking out. Staff moving in careful choreography. Maids pushing carts down hallways. Busboys clearing tables. All of them invisible. All of them part of a machinery that extracted their labor, their time, their bodies, and gave back just enough to keep them compliant. His phone buzzed. A message from Tasha, the nurse. Isla's doctor says she can be discharged tomorrow morning. Where should she go? She's worried about going home to an empty apartment with no income. Rico texted back. She's not going home. Tell her I'm arranging housing. Temporary, until she finds something permanent. Tell her not to worry about anything except rest. The rain outside the lobby's glass walls had stopped. Sunlight was beginning to break through the clouds. That moment when weather shifted, when the sky decided what came next. Rico walked through those glass doors and stepped into the light. Behind him, the Monarch Grand continued its operation. Unaware that the system it had built, the careful hierarchy of exploitation, had just been infiltrated by someone who had the power and motivation to dismantle it entirely. But Rico understood something about institutional change. It moved slowly. It required patience. It required a man willing to understand that destroying an empire didn't require dramatic violence. It required systematic, relentless pressure applied to every failure point simultaneously. He got into the SUV. His phone was already ringing. His lieutenant. Boss, we got something. Something big. The senator who you were supposed to meet. The one connected to the Monarch Grand. There's a financial trail, and it connects to something else. Someone connected to you through the Castellano family. This is gonna change everything. Rico's hand tightened on the steering wheel. Tell me, he said, the senator, the hotel, the whole operation. It's all connected to one family business. And that business has a secret. A person the family has been hiding for 15 years. And that person is directly connected to a child who just entered your life. The car went silent, except for the sound of engine and highway. What child? Rico asked, though he already understood. Noelia Cruz. Rico's vision narrowed. Her father. His name was Marco Castellano, before he married the family's designated bride. There was a relationship. There was a child. The family doesn't know about her, but someone else does. And if they realize the girl's connected to you, if they understand what you're protecting... Rico hung up. He pulled onto the shoulder of the road. And for the first time in 15 years, he understood that protection and dominance weren't the same thing anymore. One was about control. The other was about sacrifice. His phone buzzed again. This time the message came through with an image attached. A photograph of Isla sleeping in the hospital bed. Noelia curled up against her side, clearly taken from somewhere inside the hospital. The message read, "Pretty family you got there. Be smart about what comes next." Rico's entire body went cold. Someone was watching them. Someone knew exactly where they were. Someone was making a threat without words, letting him understand that the people he'd decided to protect were now targets, and the only thing keeping them alive was Rico's ability to outmaneuver, outlast, and out-destroy anyone who came for them. He called his men immediately. "I need a secure location, somewhere the Castellano family can't reach, somewhere with full medical access and total isolation. And I need it now." His lieutenant. "Boss, what's happening?" "The girl," Rico said quietly. "Her father is Marco Castellano. The family doesn't know about her, but someone does. Someone's willing to use her as leverage against me. We need to move them. Tonight, before anyone else realizes what we're protecting." Rico looked back toward the hospital in the distance. Isla was still inside, recovering. Noelia was still sleeping in that chair beside her mother. They had maybe 6 hours before the Castellano family's reach extended into that hospital room and turned protection into a liability. He put the SUV in gear and drove back toward the hospital, his mind already calculating the next 17 moves like a chess player who understood that one mistake meant checkmate. What he didn't know yet was that the threat had already begun moving, that people were already positioning themselves, that the quiet war he'd declared against the Castellano family was about to become very loud, very personal, and very bloody. And it would start in a hospital room at midnight, when men arrived to collect a girl they didn't know they had a claim to, and they would come prepared to take her by any means necessary. But Rico Santoro had one advantage they didn't account for. He got there first, and he was willing to burn the entire East Coast to the ground rather than let them touch what he'd decided to protect. The hospital room door swings open with force. A man in a tailored grey suit enters, Marcus Deshawn Caldwell, executive manager of the Monarch Grand. His shoes cost more than Isla's weekly salary. His watch costs more than her car. He doesn't look at Isla lying on the hospital bed, doesn't acknowledge Noelia sitting in the corner chair, her small frame wrapped in a blanket too large for her body. Marcus walks straight to the foot of the bed like he owns the room. "Ms. Cruz," he says, his voice clipped and professional. "You abandoned your duties during peak operational hours. We need to discuss your employment status. Additionally, your daughter's unauthorized access to restricted hotel areas has created liability complications. The hotel is examining our legal options." Rico stands in the corner of the room, his arms crossed against his chest. His black suit seems to absorb the fluorescent hospital light rather than reflect it. He turns his head slowly, just his head, nothing else moves, and stares at Marcus. Silence fills the space. Marcus continues, his nervousness showing through forced confidence. "The medical leave will be unpaid, of course. Company policy is clear on leave," Rico says. His voice sits at the bottom register of human hearing, quiet enough that you have to focus to catch the words. Marcus blinks. His hand moves toward his phone. "Sir, I don't know who you are, but this is a private hospital conversation and..." Rico steps forward. One step, that's all it takes. His shadow falls across Marcus's face. "Leave. Now. Before I make you understand what happens to people who threaten families under my watch." Marcus's face drains of color. All the confidence evaporates. He leaves the room so fast, he nearly drops his briefcase. His footsteps echo down the corridor like a retreat. Noelia looks at Rico with eyes that have seen too much trauma in one day. "You scared him," she whispers. Rico moves to stand beside Isla's bed, looking down at her face. "I don't scare people," he says, his voice carrying a different tone now, something closer to promise. "I correct mistakes, and your mother is not a mistake." Isla's hand moves beneath the hospital blanket, reaching for something. For safety, for assurance, for proof that the world still contains people willing to fight for her. The machines around her beep steadily. Monitors track vital signs returning to normal. Her blood pressure stabilizes, her breathing deepens. But something else is shifting. Something that will reshape the entire architecture of Rico's empire. Rico looks at Noelia. The girl's eyes are closing, exhaustion finally winning against adrenaline. He sees his own childhood reflected in her face, the desperation, the fear, the moment when hope arrives wearing a stranger's face. His phone vibrates, a message from his lieutenant. "Boss, we found the connection you were looking for. The hotel system. Everything ties back to the senator." Rico reads the message twice. Then he understands. Everything lines up. Every piece of the puzzle that he thought was chaos. It was always designed this way. The missed flight. The girl running. Isla's collapse. None of it was accident. All of it was preparation for what comes next. The hospital room is quiet except for machine sounds. But beneath the quiet, Rico can sense movement, can feel the machinery of the system beginning to shift and recalculate. Ila's hand grips his wrist. Her eyes are open now, searching his face for answers. "Why?" she asks, her voice carrying an accent that reminds Rico of his mother's voice before she disappeared. Rico doesn't have the answer yet, but he will. By tomorrow. By the time the sun rises on this city again, he will have dismantled enough of this system to make sure women like Isla Cruz never work themselves to death for people like Marcus Deshawn Caldwell. He doesn't tell her this. He just nods once. A promise made without words. Subscribe now and turn on notifications. The story you're about to witness will test everything you think you know about justice, protection, and what happens when power decides to fight for the powerless instead of against them. Share your thoughts in the comments. Tell us what you would do if you were in Rico's position. The real story starts now. The nurse finds Rico in the hospital corridor at 3:14 a.m. Her name is Deshonda Williams. She's worked at this hospital for 23 years. She's seen systems break people. She's watched executives ignore suffering. She's observed the machinery of inequality grinding through hallways painted institutional green. She pulls Rico aside, away from the security cameras, into a supply room that smells like antiseptic and secrets. "That briefcase you carry," Deshonda says, her voice low and careful. "The documents inside. You need to know something." Rico's entire body goes still. His hand moves to his jacket. "Speak." This hospital, the Monarch Grand, the neighborhood where Isla lives, they're all connected. Same corporation, same conglomerate. The Castellano family holdings, and the Senator, Morrison. He has direct financial involvement. We don't get paid enough to talk about this, but I have daughters, I have granddaughters, and what they're doing to women like Isla, it's intentional. Rico's jaw tightens. The pieces he already suspected snap into place with terrifying clarity. "How do you know this?" he asks. "I process medical records. I see documentation that passes through this hospital that shouldn't be public. Isla wasn't the first worker from that hotel to collapse here. There were 3 others in the past 18 months, all from the cleaning staff, all from undocumented or barely documented workers. All of them ended up on unpaid leave or fired after recovery." Rico's hand opens and closes into a fist, then opens again. Control. Precision. Always. "What else?" he asks. He walks back to Isla's room. The girl, Noelia, is asleep against her mother's shoulder, both of them finally breathing without crisis. Rico stands in the doorway and makes a phone call. "Get everything," he tells his lieutenant. "Every transaction between Castellano Holdings and the senator's office. Every labor violation at every property they control. Every worker who's been injured and forced into silence. I want it all. By sunrise." "Boss, I know what it is. Do it anyway." Rico hangs up and returns to the window. The city spreads out below the hospital, millions of people sleeping, most of them unaware that the architecture of their suffering was constructed by men they'll never meet in rooms they'll never enter. But this time, someone is pushing back. This time, the system will answer. He pulls out his wallet and removes a card, a lawyer's name, the best lawyer in the city, the kind of lawyer who specializes in corporations that exploit workers. Rico has never used this lawyer for legal purposes. He's used lawyers for other things. But this is different. This is actually legal. He texts the lawyer, "I'm bringing you a case. Worker exploitation, corporate negligence, evidence of intentional harm. How much do you charge?" The response comes back in seconds. "For a case like this, nothing. I've been waiting for someone with resources to challenge the Monarch Grand system for years." Rico closes his phone. He looks at Isla and Noelia, sleeping peacefully for the first time since this began. He understands now why the universe made him miss that flight. Why his lieutenant's betrayal forced him to the airport at that specific moment. Why a 6-year-old girl was running through a terminal looking for salvation. Because sometimes fate isn't random. Sometimes the universe is playing chess. And Rico Santoro just realized he's been positioned exactly where he needs to be. He's about to become an instrument of justice. But justice always comes with a price. Subscribe and turn on notifications because everything changes in the next chapter. Everything. The system is about to realize it created its own enemy. And Rico Santoro doesn't lose wars. Share in the comments what you think will happen when power decides to fight back against itself. Don't miss what comes next. Senator James Morrison arrives at the hospital at 4:47 a.m. He doesn't announce himself. He moves through the corridors with the confidence of a man who owns the space, even though he doesn't. 2 security officers follow 6 paces behind. His tailored navy suit costs more than most people's cars. His shoes shine like mirrors, reflecting his own importance back at himself. The security team Rico arranged stops him at Isla's door. They don't speak. They simply stand. 2 large men, immovable and silent. "I need to speak with my constituent," Morrison says, his voice carrying the practiced authority of someone accustomed to being obeyed. "Not happening," the first security officer says. His name is Tyrone. His voice sounds like gravel and final decisions. Morrison's face hardens. "Do you know who I am?" "Doesn't matter who you are," Tyrone responds. "What matters is that you're not going through that door." Morrison pulls out his phone, preparing to make calls, to leverage connections, to remind the world of his importance. But before his fingers can move across the screen, Rico appears behind him. "Senator," Rico says, and there's something in that single word that makes Morrison's blood pressure spike. "Let's talk." They move to an empty conference room 3 floors down. Morrison, Rico, and silence so heavy it could drown both of them. They sit across from each other at a long table designed for hospital administration meetings and insurance discussions. Rico doesn't open with threats. He opens with facts. "Your office called this hospital 48 hours ago. You requested they suppress medical documentation for Monarch Grand employees. You wanted liability protection for labor violations. You were coordinating with the Castellano family to ensure that workers injured on their property couldn't build cases against them." Morrison's face goes pale. "I don't know what you're talking about." "You do," Rico says, his voice remaining level. "And you're going to stop, immediately. And if I refuse..." Rico places his phone on the table. On the screen, photographs, documentation, hospital records, financial transactions, recorded conversations. Everything that connects Morrison to the exploitation of workers. Everything that proves his involvement. Everything that would end his career if it went public. "If you refuse," Rico says, "the world discovers that a United States senator intentionally protected a corporation that works women to death. The media gets these files. The FBI gets these files. Your colleagues in Congress get these files. Your donors get these files." Morrison stares at the phone. His hands are shaking. "What do you want?" "I want you to call Castellano Holdings. I want you to tell them that investigations are coming. I want you to tell them that their labor practices are about to become public knowledge. I want you to tell them that they have a choice: reform now and admit nothing, or get destroyed publicly and lose everything." "That will destroy my career," Morrison says. "Your career was built on other people's suffering," Rico responds. "So yes, it will." Morrison leaves the conference room 30 minutes later. His phone is already in his hand, making calls, warning people, setting off a chain reaction that will reshape how the Monarch Grand operates for the next decade. Rico walks back to Isla's room. The sun is rising over the city. Early morning light pours through the hospital windows, casting long shadows across the floor. Isla is awake. Noelia is still sleeping, her small hand clutching her mother's hospital gown. "What's happening?" Isla asks, her voice carrying confusion and hope tangled together like rope. "Everything is changing," Rico says. "And you're going to be safe now. That's not a promise. That's a fact." But as Rico turns to leave the room, his phone buzzes with a message that changes the entire equation. "Boss, we have a problem. The Castellano family just learned about Noelia. They know about the daughter nobody was supposed to know about. And they're making moves, dangerous ones." Rico reads the message twice. His calm expression doesn't change. But inside, something shifts. The war just escalated. The stakes just increased. And now it's not just about protecting Isla and Noelia from a broken system. Now it's about protecting them from the family that will fight with everything they have to keep their secrets buried. Subscribe now and activate notifications, because the real danger is just beginning. This isn't about corporate workers anymore. This is about a family legacy and what they'll do to protect it. Everything you think you know about this story is about to transform. Share your predictions in the comments. What do you think will happen when Rico faces off against the Castellano family directly? Tell us your thoughts and don't miss the final chapters. Rico's apartment sits 40 stories above the city. Floor-to-ceiling windows reveal Manhattan spread out like a chessboard, where he's already 3 moves ahead of everyone else. His team is gathered around a glass table covered in documents, photographs, financial records, and the architecture of a family empire built on exploitation. Tyrone stands beside him, tablet in hand, face serious. The Castellano family discovered the connection yesterday afternoon, Tyrone says, reading from his notes. Marco Castellano, the father, he's demanding a DNA test to confirm Noelia is his biological daughter. If it's confirmed, their legal team is preparing to fight for custody. Rico's expression doesn't shift. They want custody? They want control, another team member says. Her name is Keisha. She's a former investigator who now works for Rico's private intelligence operation. If they get custody of Noelia, they have leverage over you. They have leverage over Isla. They control the narrative. And more importantly, they ensure that Noelia never speaks about anything Marco did or didn't do. She becomes part of their family. She becomes protected by their code of silence. Rico walks to the window. The city sprawls beneath him. Millions of lives intersecting and separating and intersecting again. What does Marco actually want? Power, Tyrone answers, and damage control. He's been skimming family money for years, building his own operation separate from the main Castellano structure. If Noelia becomes a legal liability, if she testifies about anything, his entire house of cards collapses. Rico turns back to his team. Then we don't let her become a liability. We protect her so thoroughly that the Castellano family realizes that taking her is impossible. More than that, we make sure that if they try, they lose everything. He pulls up a document on the central screen. Bank records, property transfers, stock holdings. Marco's hidden wealth documented in excruciating detail. This, Rico says, pointing at the screen, is everything Marco has hidden from the main family. Everything he's stolen, everything he's secured for himself. His own escape plan when the Castellano Empire eventually falls. He turns to Keisha. Can you get this to his family? Keisha smiles, the smile of someone who has been waiting for permission to do exactly what she does best. Already done. Anonymous tip to the family's legal team landed in their inbox 30 minutes ago. Marco's going to spend the next week explaining where he got $32 million. Rico's phone buzzes, a message from his lieutenant. The Castellano family is tearing itself apart. Marco is denying everything. The main family is demanding he take a lie detector test. His position is collapsing. Rico reads the message and understands the implications. Marco won't care about custody anymore. He'll be too busy fighting for his survival within his own family structure. The problem just solved itself through the application of calculated pressure. But there's something else. Something Rico hasn't shared with his team yet. He walks to a secure cabinet in his office and removes a folder. Inside, photographs of Noelia. Images from the hospital. Her face, her smile, her absolute trust in him. He looks at Tyrone. I need you to understand something. This isn't about leverage anymore. This isn't about business. This is about a 6-year-old girl who ran to a stranger in an airport because no one else would help her. And I made a promise that she would be safe, that her mother would be safe. And I keep my promises. Tyrone nods slowly, understanding dawning across his face. Boss, you've never prioritized protection over profit before. I know, Rico says. I'm changing. That evening, Rico visits Isla and Noelia one more time before the hospital discharges them. Isla's medical tests are clean. Her recovery is ahead of schedule. She's ready to leave, but she's terrified of what comes next. Where will they live? How will they survive? Will the system come after them again? Rico brings her paperwork, new job offers, housing options, a security team that will follow them discreetly, always watching, always protecting. Bank transfers that cover 6 months of expenses while she heals. Why? Isla asks again. The same question she's asked 3 times now, as if the answer will suddenly make sense. Because I can, Rico responds. And because it's right. He kneels down to Noelia's level. The girl wraps her arms around his neck. You have to promise something, Rico says. What? Noelia asks. If you ever need me, if you ever feel scared, if you ever need anything at all, you call me. You ask for Rico. And I come. Immediately. Noelia nods, her young face serious with the weight of understanding that this man is now permanent in her life. As Rico stands to leave, Isla reaches out and touches his arm. The news is saying the senator is resigning. They're saying something about corruption investigations. Did you? I just made sure the truth came out, Rico says. The rest was his own choices. But as he exits the hospital and walks toward his car, Rico's phone rings. The caller ID shows a number he doesn't recognize. He answers anyway. A woman's voice. Older. Powerful. Rico Santoro. This is Regina Castellano. I'm Marco's mother. I wanted to thank you for showing me what my son has been hiding. But I also wanted to warn you about something. Just because you've won this round doesn't mean the game is over. Our family doesn't forget people who humiliate us. And you've humiliated us significantly. Rico's hand tightens on the phone. I protected a child and a mother from a corrupt system. If you see that as humiliation, that's a reflection of your values, not mine. Perhaps, Regina says. But understand this. The Castellano family always collects its debts. This war isn't finished. It's just beginning. The line goes dead. Rico stands in the hospital parking lot, the city spread out before him, and realizes that protection always comes with consequences. He's made allies today, but he's also made enemies. Powerful ones. The kind that don't forget. The kind that plan decades in advance for their revenge. Subscribe immediately and turn on notifications because the real battle hasn't started yet. This is just the setup. This is Rico discovering that some wars can't be won with money or information. They have to be won through sacrifice. Share your thoughts in the comments. Do you think Rico can actually protect Isla and Noelia from the Castellano family? What comes next in this war that's just begun? Don't miss the final chapter where everything explodes. 6 months later, the system has transformed. The Monarch Grand undergoes complete restructuring. Labor practices change. Workers get paid fairly. Health and safety protocols are enforced with the same intensity that profit used to be. 3 executives are arrested. 2 more resign and flee the country. Senator Morrison becomes the subject of federal investigations into corruption and labor negligence. But transformation always leaves casualties. Rico sits in his office on a Thursday morning. Dawn light spills across his desk. His phone has been buzzing all night with messages from his security team. The Castellano family is moving. Not against Isla, not directly against Noelia. They're moving against Rico himself. They've filed lawsuits claiming defamation. They've leaked information to rivals suggesting that Rico's operation is destabilizing. They've coordinated with federal agents to increase scrutiny on his activities. They're executing a strategy designed to tie him up in legal battles for years while they rebuild their empire in the shadows. It's sophisticated. It's ruthless. It's exactly what Rico would do if he were in their position. Tyrone enters the office carrying 2 coffee cups. He sets one on the desk in front of Rico. The lawyers say the defamation cases will take 18 months to resolve, Tyrone says. The federal investigations are broader. They're looking at every transaction you've made for the past 5 years. I know, Rico responds. So what's the move? Tyrone asks. Rico stands and walks to the window. 40 stories below, Manhattan moves through its morning routine, completely unaware that wars are being fought in boardrooms and courtrooms. That lives hang in the balance of decisions made by people wearing expensive suits. The move, Rico says, is that I stop playing their game. I stop being a criminal. I stop operating in the shadows. I go legal. Tyrone's expression shifts. Boss, that's complicated, Rico finishes. I know. But Isla and Noelia need protection. Real protection. Not the kind that comes from being connected to a mafia boss. The kind that comes from having an empire built on legitimate business. He turns back to face Tyrone. I'm going to liquidate 70% of my current operations, convert the money into legitimate investments, real estate development, business consulting, community development programs in the neighborhoods where people like Isla come from. That's going to take years, Tyrone says. I have years, Rico responds. Over the next few weeks, the transformation accelerates. Rico establishes a foundation dedicated to protecting workers' rights. He funds legal initiatives supporting people exploited by corporations. He becomes the silent partner in businesses that prioritize employee welfare over profit margins. The underworld version of Rico Santoro begins to fade, replaced by a businessman with a public face and legitimate influence. The Castellano family, watching from their own empire, realizes what's happening. The man they were fighting is becoming untouchable. You can't destroy a legal businessman through legal means without exposing your own crimes. And the Castellano family has far too many crimes to expose. 3 months after Rico's transformation begins, a formal message arrives from Regina Castellano. The Castellano family will cease their legal actions against Rico. In exchange, Rico ceases his pressure on their operations. It's a truce, not friendship, not even respect, but an understanding that some wars are more expensive than they're worth. On a Sunday afternoon, Rico visits Isla and Noelia's apartment in a neighborhood Rico's foundation has been rehabilitating. The apartment is warm, filled with light. Isla has framed photographs on the walls. Her and Noelia. Pictures from the hospital. Images of her new life working as a supervisor for a legitimate hospitality company, where she's respected and paid fairly. Noelia runs to Rico the moment he enters, throwing her arms around him without hesitation. "You came!" she shouts. "You promised, and you came!" Rico lifts her, understanding something fundamental about the nature of promise and protection, and what it means to be someone a child can trust completely. Isla stands in the kitchen doorway, watching this man who destroyed systems to protect her daughter. She's learned his story by now. She knows who he was. She knows what he did. She knows that the choices he made to save her came at enormous cost. "Thank you," she says simply. Rico sets Noelia down and looks at both of them. The woman who nearly died because the system didn't value her life, and the child who ran to a stranger because no one else would help. "The war isn't over," Rico says. The Castellano family will probably come for me eventually. Other families might move against me. But as long as I'm breathing, as long as I have resources, you'll be protected. That's not a promise that might break. That's infrastructure. That's reality. Noelia takes his hand. Are you going to be my dad? She asks, with the directness only children possess. Rico looks at Isla. Isla looks at Rico. Something unspoken passes between them. The understanding that sometimes families aren't created by blood or legal documents. Sometimes they're created by moment of crisis when a stranger chooses to stay. If your mother allows it, Rico says, I would be honored to be your dad. Isla's eyes fill with tears. She nods, unable to speak. That evening, as Rico drives back toward his office, his phone buzzes one final time. A message from his lieutenant. Boss, we've got intel on 3 new crimes the Castellano family is planning. They're expanding into human trafficking. Should we move against them? Rico reads the message and understands that the journey is never actually complete. There's always another battle, always another system to challenge, always another moment where he has to choose between profit and protection. He texts back, document everything. We move publicly. No more shadows. We destroy them through the legal system they created. And in that moment, Rico Santoro, the man who used to operate in darkness, who used to build empires on fear, who used to believe that strength meant cruelty, understands something that changes everything. Real power isn't about how many people you can hurt. Real power is about how many people you can save. And justice, true justice, doesn't come quietly. It comes through the machinery of systems that finally get turned against the people who built them. The brown leather briefcase sits on the back seat of his car. But it's empty now. The documents that once represented leverage and power are archived, stored, evidence in ongoing federal investigations. Rico doesn't need that briefcase anymore. He doesn't need secrets or hidden leverage. He just needs to remember that morning at the airport when a 6-year-old girl with blonde hair in a high ponytail looked at him with absolute certainty that he could save her. And he did. Subscribe and hit notifications because justice doesn't end in one story. Justice is a continuous choice made every day by people willing to dismantle systems of harm. The next chapter in this journey is coming. The next battle is beginning. Rico Santoro's war against corruption doesn't stop with the Castellano family. It expands, it grows, it becomes a movement. Share your thoughts in the comments. What do you think about Rico's transformation? Is redemption possible for people who operated in shadow for so long? Tell us your perspective. Inspire others with your thoughts. Because this story isn't just about one man protecting 2 people. It's about all of us learning that we have the power to challenge systems that harm the vulnerable. That we can choose protection over profit. That we can build something better. Don't miss the next story. Turn on notifications. Join us as we continue exploring characters who challenge corruption and protect the powerless. This is where real stories live. This is where justice happens. Subscribe now.